Friends of NRA is your chance to support our Second Amendment rights and preserve America's hunting traditions. Join Friends of NRA at one of our 600 exciting events nationwide. From games to auctions and exclusive firearms, Friends of NRA events are your chance to support a cause you care about while having a great time with patriots in your community. Whether you're a seasoned shooter, an avid hunter or outdoorsman, or passionate about freedom, there's a place for you within Friends of NRA. Visit friendsofnra.org to find an event near you. Stand up for freedom with the Friends of NRA.
Want to plan your next fishing trip without the hassle? FishingBooker.com is the best way to find and book a fishing charter anywhere in the world. Whether you're chasing trophy fish or just looking for a family day on the water, Fishing Booker makes it simple, fast, and secure. With thousands of experienced guides, verified reviews, and 24/7 customer support, Fishing Booker takes the guesswork out of planning. Visit FishingBooker.com and book your trip today. Fishing Booker. Fishing trips made easy.
Today, we're diving into conversation about reconnecting with the ancestral foodways and rethinking the ingredients we use every day. From the intersection of environmental sustainability and traditional food knowledge to the modern movement of decolonizing diets. We'll explore how food can be both a form of resistance and a path towards cultural preservation. Get ready for an insightful discussion on reclaiming indigenous ingredients, cooking with intention, and challenging the way we think about the foods on our plate. Grab a seat and listen up.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
All right, so just a few items before we get started here. So next up, after this episode, our next episode we will be releasing, we'll be chatting with Allie Moore from Buggable about foraging for and eating insects. And Adam and I both bought bags of like dried insects. I don't even know what's in there, Adam. What all is in this bag?
Let's see. It's mixed bugs. We have grasshoppers, mole crickets, silkworms, field crickets, and sago worms.
I think the worms I've never had. I've eaten the crickets and the grasshoppers for sure.
My friends were visiting with their little boy this weekend, so I opened it before we tried it and ate one with him. So he was a brave kid.
Nice. I remember. Quick funny story right in the middle of this. I remember my grandmother getting my cousins. Oh, you got dark chocolate crickets. That looks good. Oh, you know what? I've had the Don Buguito before. I actually, when I was at Sean Sherman's restaurant, I had them there. That's good. Yeah.
Nice.
I was going to say my grandmother tricked one of my cousins once into eating like a whole live grasshopper. She took like a grasshopper leg and put it in her mouth, like hanging out, and was like, yeah, sure, it's totally good. We eat them all the time. And then my cousin was probably like 6 or 7, I don't know, went and caught one and then ate it. And she's like, haha. But I thought it was an interesting trick for your grandmother to play on you, but it's a small child. That's okay. It was an introduction to eating bugs. Other news, I think the only things I have to say is we've got the new newsletter coming out every week. If you're not subscribed to that, head over to the website and sign up for the email newsletter thing, and you'll get that. I've been putting them out on Sundays. They're a little more personal, a little more interconnected versus our like daily recipe or article updates that you normally get. These will come out like late Sunday evening, probably because that's when I have time to write it. And they'll include kind of a recap of the week along with like whatever projects we're working on, me, Adam, Casey, and the larger Harvesting Nature sort of loosely staff, I guess we'll call ourselves, and just kind of thoughts going through. Like last week, I talked a lot about fur and the incorporation of fur in the outdoors and why more outdoor brands aren't using fur on their clothing versus synthetics and things like that. So a lot of interesting thoughts. You can kind of get inside my head a little bit, and Adam's got thoughts and ideas and stuff too that we'll share as well. Other than that, we're moving the store from the website over to another website that's almost done. It'll be coming out concurrently. That'll probably be timed with the release of the venison sausage book, along with the release date of our next pig camp, which will be in December. So that'll be all in there. We also have one seat available for the Hank Shaw pig camp that's still available. We had a cancellation, so if you want that, swoop in real quick and grab that before it's gone. Otherwise, that camp is completely sold out. Adam, over to you. I've talked enough.
I don't have too much going on. Just been digging myself out of Snowmageddon up here. But just been kind of enjoying the winter, and I've been making plans recently with a buddy to go visit during maple season, which should be coming up in not too long. Everything's pretty frozen right now, but it won't be too much longer. So yeah, he just has a really small kind of personal setup, and so I'm going to join him for a little while on that one. So I'm looking forward to shaking things up and getting some wild food in my kitchen again.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Mm-hmm. I've never, there's like one of the state parks here is doing a maple syrup demonstration coming up next month. It's like kind of a little mini festival over the weekend, and I was going to take my kids to kind of see the process because growing up in the South, I've never seen how maple syrup is produced or harvested and produced. So it'll be cool to see that. But
yeah, it's like that. And I like doing it as a little kid, going to the sugar shack and seeing it all happen when I was a little. Yeah, love it.
Those different meanings where I come from. But we're going to talk, as I mentioned in the introduction, a lot about Indigenous foods today. And our guest, once I introduce her, you will understand where we're coming from that. So today's guest is a chef, food and environmental advocate, entrepreneur, and educator who founded IndigiKitchen, an online cooking show promoting the use of pre-contact ingredients. A member of both the Blackfeet and Cherokee Nation, she is a passionate advocate for Indigenous people's rights and ancestral knowledge. Mariah Gladstone, welcome to the Wild Fish and Game podcast.
Yeah, it's so good to be here today.
Thanks for coming on. Always great to podcast during blizzard warnings, so I'll throw that out there.
No better time.
Could you share a little more about your background and yourself? How did you become interested in cooking? Just kind of start at the beginning and end up where we are, I guess, if wherever you want to share.
Sure. So I grew up in Northwestern Montana near the Blackfeet Reservation, about an hour and a half away, actually. But I was really lucky that I grew up raised in my homelands and being able to be connected with wild foods. And that ranged from the wild raspberries that grew in the backyard and picking morel mushrooms and all of that, but also my dad and my grandpa building me a garden, which of course was fencing off an area of the yard from our dogs and letting me intricately graph things out on graph paper and plot out exactly how my garden was going to be. My mom always told me that no self-respecting Cherokee would ever have a garden without corn. And I thought she was just kind of being a hard ass, until I got my seeds from the Cherokee Nation seed bank decades later that said, no self-respecting Cherokee would ever plant a garden without corn. Cherokee proverb. I'm like, all right, okay. So I grew up gardening and foraging and gathering. And my immediate family didn't hunt, but we always had wild game in the freezer from cousins and fish from relatives and all of that. And as I got older, I got into hunting and fishing and all of these things, and continued to expand my plant and animal knowledge. But along the way, I also thought that my path was going in a little bit different direction. Those career aptitude tests they make you take in high school, and they're like, you liked playing with Legos, you should be an engineer. So I did go to engineering school, but always cooked as kind of my stress coping mechanism. And I continued to cook throughout college. I missed my foods from back home because I went to college in New York City. And it was back home spending my summers on the reservation, sometimes without a car. So I was 40 miles from the grocery store. I got to really start connecting with the foods that I had access to that were right outside my front door. So I got to really connect with those things. And I turned it into a career after I graduated. I immediately actually went into engineering management, but I kept taking vacation days to go to food sovereignty conferences and different Indigenous food related activities, and eventually quit my job and started a business. I did some little kind of temporary work on the side while I was building my business, and eventually realized it was a full-time job, just teaching people about Indigenous food systems. So I get to have new and exciting adventures every day, just working with the diversity and abundance of Native food systems.
Oh, that's awesome. Whenever you started sort of working, sharing recipes and food and ideas and stuff, how receptive was it? How were people both, I guess, native and non-native in receiving the information?
Yeah, I realized that everyone was very interested in restoring a lot of this Indigenous knowledge. I mean, we say so often that, oh, our traditional food systems have been lost. It's like they haven't been lost. They were really intentionally taken away from people. You know, our hunting grounds were restricted. We were forced to depend on government rations. And of course, the knowledge that we had that went along with all of our traditional food systems went with it. So we have to make it really accessible in order to restore that information. So I was like, I need to make recipes that we can Google and that are going to be made in short social media minute-long videos that will make this really simple for people to understand. And so, of course, I don't have a background in culinary arts. I didn't go to culinary school. I don't have a background in video editing or anything like that. So my first videos that I made were actually recipes that were shared to me from some of my friends at college. And I had a janky camera set up. I had to jerry rig it using like a headband and a screwdriver just because it was too heavy. My camera was too heavy for the little tripod. And so I was like trying to figure out how to set it up. My cousin Lily, who is, of course, the rock star on Killers of the Flower Moon, she was like, you need to get a lighting setup, because I was just jankily editing things together with shadows all over it. And she's like, you need lights. That's the one thing you should really invest in. I was like, okay. And I edited things on Windows Movie Maker, which is, cheap, free, basic software. It worked, and that's what my first videos were made off of. But even from the very beginning, people were interested. They wanted that kind of content for reconnecting with Indigenous knowledge. I could see even my little shadowy videos that I was putting out. People were tagging their family members. I could see people saying, Grandma, we should make this weekend. And I was like, aw, because it reminds you that cooking it's not just about the foods that we're eating in our bodies and macronutrients and all of that. That's part of it. But cooking is familial relationships. It's connection with the landscape. It's a recognition of ancestral wisdom and all of these other things that are part of food systems. And then, of course, you can get into land management and sustainable harvest and all of these. I mean, I use the word systems for a reason, because everything is really connected. And so it was really cool to see the excitement of folks and how they were receiving even my very basic first videos that I was putting out. I have since improved video quality and all of the things that go with it. But it was definitely cool to see the excitement even from the beginning.
Oh, that's awesome.
That story sounds awful familiar, except for the people being interested part. I think the janky camera setups and the lack of lights. I recognize all that in my own journey. But it's cool that you were doing something that people like stoked people's pride and kind of these comfy family feelings. It's always amazing when food can evoke that, especially over the internet, not even like in the same kitchen, which is crazy sometimes.
Yeah, now I get to see very much the same thing. I mean, people still tag family members and share, and I get to see all of that. But now also, when I first started putting out recipes, people weren't really using the story feature as much on Instagram and Facebook. That wasn't, I mean, I guess does that make me old in business terms? I don't know. But now people will try the recipes at home and then they'll take pictures and I'll get tagged in people's stories. So I get to see, okay, we're kid testing this recipe. Here's my 5-year-old eating it with like first bites. And the kid's like, yeah, that's pretty good or whatever. It's like, this tastes funny. Okay, cool. But I get to see it and people are actually engaging with it. And that reassures me that this is not just recipes that are getting put into the digital cloud, but rather they're recipes that people are actually using and connecting with. And I run into people all the time that are like, oh, you're in Kitchen. And I was like, yeah, I'm in Kitchen. I have a name, but we're just going to go with Kitchen at this point. And they're like, I love your recipe for bison and butternut squash lasagna. And I'm like, cool. Like, the fact that these people eat it and eat it regularly enough that it's part of their regular kind of meal planning is really cool to see. Or they know me from a recipe and not my face or my name. I'm like, I'm good with that.
No, that's an awesome feeling. I was thinking about sort of when you were saying that, the approachability of Indigenous cuisine. And I think about it, if we roll back, 20 years ago or so, and you didn't have as many conversations as you have now around Indigenous foods. And I mean, they were there, people were consuming them, but maybe the connection wasn't there. But I was thinking this today. So today I was working on a recipe, venison arm roast, and I wanted to do a juniper berry braise. But I know that if I'm going to create a recipe that I want to be shared, similar to what you're doing as well, it has to be something that's approachable for anybody and searchable, right? I guess to an extent, but also something I want to enjoy and I want to eat. But I'm also, it's a double-edged sword. I'm trying to send a message of like, hey, check this out. It's not as complicated as you think it is, but even like tossing out juniper berries to someone who may not know what they are. They may have seen them in the store, or they may, like, all right, well, I don't know. I've got one deer roast in the fridge or the freezer left from this season. Am I going to use it on this juniper berry recipe? But I think it's really cool. I think that sort of like, you've done a great job of making things very approachable from a standpoint of anybody at any level that can cook. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I try to include a lot of substitutions. I try to connect, if there's foraged ingredients in the recipes, I try to, if possible, include kind of a background on some of those ingredients, where you can find them. I mean, junipers grow across the continent. So you might not have this variety of creeping juniper that we have in Montana, but you might have a different juniper, something in that juniperus family, or the Thuya genus, right? Where you have all your cedars and then you can connect with that. And then you can share a fun fact about those, like juniper berries. They're really great if you are really thirsty on your hike and you ran out of water, because you can chew one up and it will make your mouth feel moist until you can get back to your car and get some water or whatever, right? Like, that's a fun, stupid fact about juniper berries. But it just kind of connects. I realized along the way, there's so many things that make that information more likely to actually be tried. Like, what makes a person go, oh, cool recipe, to I'm trying this tonight, like gathering those ingredients, whatever it might be. And I realized everything from, oh, you need to take really pretty pictures of food. Like, you got to have pretty plating for that picture, because if it looks ugly and gray, and people are going to be like, I don't know. I've also learned the hint to naming recipes is just to include as much details about what you're actually doing and what you're putting in it as possible. Don't just be like, this is a lasagna. You have to be like, oh, this is a Italian sausage, like heirloom tomato sauce. Like, it's a lasagna, but we're just adding herbed rosemary, like all these things. We'll just,
you got to sell it in like the first 10 words.
Yeah. And if you add all the words, you can also tell someone almost exactly what you're doing. Especially with a lot of my recipes, they're so simple. And that's because I'm not trying to make 5-star meals. I'm trying to make things that people are going to make when they go home from work at the end of the day, or that kids are going to feel comfortable preparing at home. Part of my chores growing up was, you have to cook dinner for the house at least once a week. So like you're going to have to learn how to cook when you get home from school and track practice and whatever else. So I try to make things really easy for people.
No, it's good. I think that I like the aspect for the kids too of being able to, because like my daughter's coming to the age now, she's 12 and she's starting to cook more independently on her own, and she'll search out recipes. She'll like flip through the cookbooks we have, and I can see she'll be like, I don't want to make that. That's too much. Or like, I just want to make something that tastes good that I will like, and I know you guys will like. And so that's a cool aspect that I think more people should focus on. I think you see like little segments of it here and there. People will kick out a recipe or two and be like, this is a kid's recipe or this is that, but sort of like just making it all approachable is great.
Send me your address and I will send you a cookbook for your daughter, because I just finished my kids' cookbook. So
yeah, I saw that. Congratulations.
That's what's really exciting is I noticed that more people are coming out with Indigenous recipes in that space. And I'm like, I'm going to make something specifically for kids. And, I didn't mention this as part of my life story at the beginning of the show, but my mom made me cook when I was a little kid. And she was taking a class to finish her college degree. And in her class, she learned that kids that grow up cooking learn fractions better. So she was like, all right, you're 2. It's time to learn fractions.
And
right? That's my mother. So she's like, there are 4 overripe bananas. We only need 2 for this recipe. You're doubling it, right? It was very Montessori method. Like, 2 half cup. That makes a cup, right? I can see everything happening in the actual quantities. And as a kid, that's really easy to conceptualize. And so, the next year when I was 3, I was like, I know how to make all of these things, right? I was really grounded in my cooking methodology. And I would wake up and I'd be like, all right, I had a dream about how to make cookies. I'm going to prepare them. And my mom's like, okay, but you have to write all the ingredients down and I'll just make sure you don't burn the house down. I'm like, cool, great, perfect. So I have handwritten recipes from when I was 3 with the accompanying spelling in marker, 1-C-B-U-T-R, butter, right? And sometimes things would turn out, right? My mom would be like, worst case scenario, we lose some ingredients. It doesn't turn out. Best case scenario, you get to eat something that you made yourself. And so I got really comfortable with experimenting with food, which somewhere along the lines, I learned fractions, might be why I became an engineer. And here we are. But that's what I get to do all the time now is I get to experiment with foods, right? I get to play around with things like juniper berries and stinging nettles and wild bergamot and all the berries that we have in abundance in Montana. And I get to try to turn them into crazy things that are also still easy and accessible. So that's really, really fun. But yeah, it's all grounded in that history of experimentation I got as a kid.
That's amazing thing about wild food is that in a similar kind of past where I was experimenting as a child with cooking into my teenagehood, into my adulthood, I made my way through the grocery store that were the grocery stores that were available to me. And then I found the Asian grocery stores and the Eastern European grocery stores and whatever. And I explored those and I kind of went through all the ingredients. And then I got into wild food and there's a whole new, like, massive amount of ingredients to experiment with. So it just opens up this like brand new massive arena of crazy, super unique ingredients to play with in the kitchen, which is, if nothing else, a great reason to switch over to foraging for your food, hunting and fishing.
What I think to each environment you go to, so you can go to so many different environments and find such a diversity of ingredients too. It's almost like finding a new, grocery store that carries something really special, but it's wild and it's free and you can just go get it if you learn what to eat, not to eat.
Yeah, the experimenting potential is incredible. I like that a lot.
So this is a question we ask all of our guests. It's a fun question, so don't worry. It's what is in your freezer or pantry that you're looking forward to cooking next?
Ooh, good question. Right now my freezer it's pretty bare. in part because I'm trying to make it pretty bare, because Blackfeet have hunting rights outside of Yellowstone. So I'm like, there's still time this winter before the buffalo season closes. And I
Oh,
can get
yeah.
a buffalo in there, which means I need to have it pretty empty.
Have a whole freezer.
You need a lot of space for that.
Yeah, that said, I have a lot of elk roast and deer roast that I'm excited about. I also have a grouse, and I didn't go out and get the grouse. It flew into my window 5 minutes before I had to do a cooking demonstration. So I was like, grouse are really easy to field dress. So we're just going to do that in my kitchen right now.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about that. I want to do like a white chili with my little grouse. I think that's a good way to make a little bit of grouse go a long way. And then hopefully fill my freezer with, my mother-in-law was just complaining about how she has 1 million Huns that keep eating her garden, the Hungarian partridges. So I'm like, I can solve that problem for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please let me solve that problem for you. So that is all things I'm looking forward to filling my freezer with. Right now, it's a lot of deer and elk, but also made a whole bunch of dry meat with that deer and elk too. So I guess those are things in the pantry now because I was making space in the freezer by drying that meat out. So
Awesome. Cool. No, that's great.
Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. You'll get 5 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Plus, enjoy access to the American Express Global Lounge Collection. And with the welcome offer of 150,000 points, your business can soar to all new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum. Built for business by American Express.
Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check the Jumbotron first, before attempting to eat a stack of Supreme nachos in one bite. Now you're just a meme that everyone shares on game day. Checking first is smart, so check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary, subject to terms, conditions, and availability. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates, Northbrook, Illinois.
So thinking about sort of food as a resistance piece, can you explain sort of what that means to you?
yeah, sure thing. So for Indigenous people, food was used by colonial governments, both the US and Canada, to control Native people. And so from the very early days of the US government, George Washington attacked the Haudenosaunee. He wrote orders to his general to not just burn the villages, but burn their farmland and their seed banks and their gardens so that they will not be able to plant again. Really, the idea was control the food to control the people. And that kind of strategy continued to be employed across the continent. It was, of course, a similar mentality, though a very different execution, which led to the mass eradication of buffalo from the prairies, going from numbers close to 60 million to less than 1,000. And of course, all the nations that depended on that for food, clothing, shelter, tools, ceremony, everything else really suffered. And so when we were forced to depend on government rations, we lost our ability to really effectively fight back against land theft and colonization and forced relocations and all of that. There was actually a line in the 1850 Commissioner of Indian Affairs report that wrote, "It is cheaper in the end to feed the whole flock for a year than to fight them for a week." Essentially saying, let's force Native people to depend on subsidized food so that they won't fight back against us. Similarly, Congress passed an act which allowed rations to be withheld from any families that did not send their children to boarding schools, which were, of course, forced assimilation residential programs, right? And so food and culture and political sovereignty has really been intertwined for a long time. There's a quote, it's often attributed to Winona LaDuke, which just says, "How can we call ourselves sovereign if we can't feed ourselves?" Right? We can't resist and push back against all these other things if it will affect our ability to eat and survive. And there was one winter here on the Blackfeet Nation where we were dependent on rations, but very much like the weather we're having now, blizzards and big snowfalls and cold, it affected the shipments of rations. There is some evidence that those were intentionally delayed, but it forced our people to the point of starvation. And in one winter, we lost a quarter of our population from starvation. And in the years that followed, there were decisions that were made to sell off some of our reservation lands so that we would be able to buy cattle, to buy food, so that we would never face that again. One of those parcels of land became the eastern half of Glacier National Park, which is, of course, a massive tourist destination. So there's a quote from a chief at the time because there's a mountain that's right on the border of Glacier and our reservation now. It's Chief Mountain. It's our most sacred mountain to the Blackfeet people. And this chief said, "Chief Mountain is my head. Now my head has been cut off. The mountains were my last refuge." But I also look at that and I see, oh my gosh, our leaders made the decision to sell off some of our most sacred lands so that we would be able to have future generations of Blackfeet, so that we wouldn't have to worry about starvation. And so where I live, I can see Chief Mountain from my living room window. And that is this deep recognition of not just the value that my ancestors placed on my identity as a future descendant, like my value as a Blackfeet person today was considered even more important than those sacred places. And that is incredibly powerful. But also I see that as a big responsibility, right? Those places were taken away because we were on the brink of starvation, and we needed the funds that came with that, with selling off those lands. But also it's my responsibility as a person alive today in the 21st century to do what I can to restore our food sovereignty so that we can continue to push for our political sovereignty and our treaty rights and all of those other things. So it's really complicated. And also I get to talk about nutrition and macronutrients and all of that, but it's tied up in so much more for me. And I get to see that every time I look out my window. So
really to tie it all in. So food as a resistance enables restoring sort of like traditional food pathways is a way to sort of resist some of the systematic sort of atrocities that have happened, or forced atrocities.
Yeah. And for me, taking away our food was a way of taking away our resistance, right? So restoring it's part of bringing that back. There's also another layer of that, which is because of the forced transition that we had to these pretty unhealthy subsidized food systems, our diet-related illnesses and the rates of diabetes and heart disease and malnutrition and obesity and all of those things really reflect that. And so it is also part of resisting. There's an Audre Lorde quote, which is, "Caring for ourselves is not self-indulgence, it is resistance. It's an act of resistance," right? And so I think that eating good food, healthy food from the land, being able to feed ourselves right outside our front door is also part of resistance. And being healthy, strong, tough individuals is part of that too. So
it shows there is no necessity for dependence. Essentially, it proves exactly what you said earlier about how can we call ourselves sovereign if we can't feed ourselves? Well, if you can feed yourselves, your pathway to sovereignty is much easier accomplished.
Yeah, there's a lot of different layers to all the things that I talk about. But it's, I mean, I get to share good recipes most of the time, and but it's all like multi-layered in all of these different dimensions of what's going on in the background and the historical grounding of why we have to talk about all of this.
It shows just how powerful food is. I think it's often relegated to being a fluff piece in newspapers and magazines and the add-ons or whatever, but it's something we do all day, every day, or I eat all day, every day. Maybe other people eat 3 times a day. But it's tied. It's linked through everything, and it's powerful enough to bring a nation to its knees or to make it stand up again. I think so. Yeah, it's something to remember when people just kind of write food off as something that's not worth talking about.
Yeah, and I think the other advantage of talking about food is it is considered a fluff piece sometimes, right? But give me a platform and I'll start talking about a whole bunch of other things because they're all connected to food. So I get to use food as a vehicle to talk about all these other really important things. And at the end, like, oh, this whole time we've been actually making a recipe together. Right. And so it makes these topics, which like, hey, who wants to sit down with Mariah and talk about genocide and colonization? Like, probably not everybody. But who wants to sit down and make a really good recipe that's good for your body and you can find it on the land? Like, there we go. Like, that is the door that will get
people's attention.
Everybody talking, even folks that might not necessarily want to engage in these discussion topics with me. But I do think it's a great vehicle for being able to reach people across ideological lines that you wouldn't necessarily have as part of your audience. Is food the Trojan horse? I don't know.
Yeah, that's
That's
in a lot of ways, yes, I think.
To sort of tie it all together, if people are interested to sort of invoke the concept of food as resistance, and we can talk about people from any culture or even indigenous cultures or whatever, I think there's some widespread reliance on an industrial food system as a whole in general. And I think even food as a resistance in that concept walks a similar path as it does from an indigenous perspective. How can people start? Where would they start?
Yeah, I think that people are across the board more interested in knowing where the food that they're eating comes from, but also what they're supporting by wherever their food's coming from. Like these various forms of, large scale industrial agriculture we're really disconnected from. We don't know when we go to the grocery store, like where the bananas come from, right? Or, cool, bananas, product of a country, right? That might be the only information that we have. What farm, like who's picking them? Are we exploiting human labor, or is there like some kind of fertilizer issue? Like there is a whole bunch of connected issues and we just don't know about them, right? Because that's so many lines of connection and trade and away from us that we just don't have the mental capacity to engage in that much thinking about where the bananas are coming from, right? So I think that when we engage with food that's wild or that comes from the land or that comes from the garden or that comes from our neighbor down the street or the rancher down the road or whatever that may be, now we're able to see, like, I know that the elk that we go hunting for in the fall winter way far east away from us, and then they'll migrate through our land and we'll see them up there. And I know that those elk are doing well, right? I know that those elk are not there right now because I saw a grizzly bear there yesterday and they don't want to be there either, right? So there's a much more direct connection to the food. And I know that if somebody starts dumping their garbage in that waterway, that's going to affect the elk that I get to see every day, that I plan on hunting as soon as archery season opens up, right? And I don't want to eat elk that are drinking toxic polluted water. And so it gives me a much more vested interest in maintaining all of these other systems. But also it means that if I fill my freezer with elk meat that we're going bow hunting for, that we're cutting up and processing into burger and summer sausage and all of these other things, then that also means that I can disengage from buying a whole bunch of other red meat at the grocery store, right? Because I'm not directly connected with that product, but it lets me kind of both simultaneously engage with something more locally, become more reliant on that system that's nearby that I get to see all the time, and disconnect from that industrial agriculture system. So, it's like a teeter-totter, or, kind of weighing, like, I don't have to, as the price of meat and everything else was going up, I was like, honestly, I didn't notice, because we don't really buy steak or beef at all in the grocery store. I'm like, I don't buy fish at the grocery store. I get my cousins that live on the coast in Seattle, they'll just bring me fish. And so that's the fish that I have in my freezer. Or we have trout that are in the streams around here. So there's a couple things that I haven't bought at the grocery store, except for very, very, very rarely. When those things started going crazy in price, I don't notice that in the same way that I notice people potentially polluting the water by dumping garbage there. So, yeah, it's definitely interconnected, but it's a way of resisting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it ties into, we talk about or think about like inflation and things like that as things rise. If you're not dependent on the things that are inflating, then you're not dependent, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know there's the memes about it's like the rich people looking down on all the peasants, and it's like how people with backyard chickens feel right now. Like, as they're disengaging from the egg market. Like, you don't need to buy the eggs, right? They haven't noticed that the egg prices are so high.
We're going to be moving in the summer again. And I told my wife, I was like, when we move to our next place, I was like, we're for sure going to get some chickens. Like, I think it's a valuable thing too. Like, we go through eggs in my house with my kids. And it's just like, and me too. I eat eggs as well. It's pretty tasty. But I think, just having that ability to be like, all right, that's one less thing I need to worry about getting at the store. Like, I can just get it. And so
unless you're thinking about the chicken food, then it's a whole other thing you have to think about. But if the chickens can go outside and peck around for bugs in your garden, then you could have like 2-for-1 pest management and food, which worked out pretty well. I had ducks. I never had chickens.
I heard ducks are great at insect control.
I had a duck that was 2 days old that just hatched from its egg, and I was like, oh, it's so cute. We'll go outside and play with it. It was snatching flies out of the air as like a little baby
That's awesome.
duckling. I live in Montana, obviously, and my electric fence failed, and I did have a grizzly bear that got in and decided that it was going to eat my ducks. So, also be aware of systems like that. That is my warning.
Yeah.
I was trying to look. There's I can't remember. Oh, The Biggest Little Farm. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a documentary. It's pretty good. It's about a farm like in California. They buy like this old failed farm and they bring it back for the like regenerative agriculture and like very hands-on sort of approach. But they end up with this snail infestation in I think it's their orchard. They grow stone fruit, and they, instead of using pesticides or anything, they fence it off and they release like hundreds of ducks, because apparently ducks love snails. So, and they just come through, and it shows you like on the video, they're just going around tree to tree, just plucking off these snail. And I was like, that is the coolest thing ever.
Amazing. See? Yeah. Then you get the added benefit of like duck poop as fertilizer. There's
that's
a whole bunch of intertwined systems happening.
Yeah. That's what, man, now I'm gonna have to get ducks.
Okay. But I will warn you that ducks, they love water. Right. And so they are splashy and they are messy, and you will just have to be aware that they always need water to play around and splash in, and they have to clean their little nostril holes on their bills with water. So it has to be deep enough that they can submerge their bills. And it gets a little bit tedious. I was definitely hauling like fresh water to my ducks in 40 below weather. But they were so tough. They were like, I didn't have any ducks freeze, and I didn't have a super sturdy duck house. I built them a house out of straw bales, and I was like, this is your home now, ducks. And they would just huddle together, and they were fine in 40 below blizzard, crazy weather. So ducks are a lot tougher than I thought they would be, except when it came to grizzly bears.
Not quite as tough as a grizzly bear.
Hard to pin anything against a grizzly bear. I too would have challenges. Lots of them.
So good, so good, so good.
Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack.
Because they have framed jeans.
Nike, yes.
Just so many good brands.
Vince, Kurt Geiger London, Rag & Bone, and more are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. You never know what you'll find, but you know it's going to be so good. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
I think I just won my taxes.
Yeah?
I just switched to H&R Block in about 1 minute. All I had to do was drag and drop last year's return into H&R Block, and bam, my information is automatically there.
So I don't have to go digging around for all my old papers to switch?
Nope.
Sounds like we just leveled up our tax game.
Switching to H&R Block is easy. Just drag and drop your last return. It's better with Block.
All right, so I do want to hit on another couple things before we sort of close out. I mentioned earlier, like the concept of decolonizing a diet. From your perspective, what does decolonizing a diet look like?
Yeah, so I more often use the term re-indigenizing a diet.
Ooh, I like it. Re-indigenizing.
And that's,
it sounds more positive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it does. I feel like decolonizing, I mean, it is an academic term. It's used all the time. But especially if you're not familiar with that term, it sounds like moving backwards and undoing colonization, which we can't undo it, right? But we can use all of these ancestral tools of 14,000 plus years of empirical data and knowledge and science and, intentional agricultural breeding and sustainable harvest and all of this to guide our path forward into sustainable and healthy existences in the 21st century. And so that's why I've been using the term re-indigenizing. Yeah, because it does seem more positive. And I think it connects with a lot of people in a way that decolonizing doesn't necessarily do that. But that's just a personal choice that I've made recently. But that's what it means to me. It's about using those old tools to connect.
I guess when we're looking at kind of going through the act of re-indigenizing our food, how do you recommend people sort of replace like common ingredients that aren't necessarily part of the indigenous landscape? So like pork, wheat, sugar, or I guess it would be like white cane sugar or processed sugar, even processed cooking oils, which I think is probably one of the most common thing in people's kitchen that a lot of folks don't talk about.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that my cousin taught me how to do, which I will forever be grateful, is render tallow and render those fats and make it into not just sustainable cooking oils that are, of course, good and healthy for us and have a much longer shelf life than our vegetable oils, but also can be used for skincare and everything else. So I think that there's a lot of substitutions that are pretty easy to make. I mean, obviously, if you can substitute your meat with wild game meat, that's incredible. Even if you can, almost everywhere is a place with deer hunters, right? And a lot of deer hunters I know love hunting deer, right? To the point where they will sometimes end up with more deer than they have freezer space for, right? And so, but also are really interested in sharing that experience with other people. So if that's something that people are interested in connecting with, then to really reach out to the folks that can share that experience and teach them a little bit more about hunting. We will very rarely go rifle hunting. For us, it's a lot more archery hunting. And I know that a lot of people are resistant to maybe firearms or something. But there's other ways, right? Of course, bow hunting is super fun. And it's like the biggest game of dress up because you get to go into camouflage and sneak around and be all creepy in a way that you don't get to necessarily have the same experience rifle hunting. So I think that that's a really easy substitute. If you can start substituting things like deer in for beef, especially if it's like grain-fed mass produced beef. That's an easy switch. And of course, what comes along with that is lower fat, higher protein content, just generally, I don't know, I think a more flavorful meat, but I like wild game. I like the taste of wild game and all of that. Same thing if there are, if you can substitute, and this really depends on where you live, but if you can substitute game birds, whether they're things like grouse or prairie chickens or pheasants or things like that, wild turkeys, a lot of folks live in wild turkey country, or ducks or geese, or that's kind of a different type of meat, but to start incorporating some of those things, then that's awesome. To fish in the streams that you have, those things are relatively easy for people to connect with depending on where they live, right? Those are pretty easy substitutes. And then you start getting into more of your starches and your carbohydrates. And if you can start substituting things like wheat flour for root vegetables, which is really common for a lot of Native people, sweet potatoes, for example, right? Sweet potatoes are indigenous to South America. Nutritionally, they're really similar to a lot of the root vegetables that Native people incorporated. Lower glycemic content than your white flour, for example, and a lot more other nutrients and vitamins that are part of that. So that's easy for people to access, or grow your own low glycemic potatoes. I like Huckleberry Golds because that's kind of a weird Montana variety that we have here, and they're like delicious low glycemic. They're purple on the outside and yellow on the inside, and they're super easy to grow, right? I'm not going to grow a field of wild rice in my backyard because I don't live in wild rice country, right? But there are other types of things that kind of satisfy that macronutrient quadrant of what we're looking for. And then, of course, connecting with other things like wild onions. And I will occasionally go out and dig camas bulbs. It's kind of a whole enterprise to undertake that with the slow roasting and the digging at the certain time of the year. But that's something I like to do. And then you mentioned the white sugar as well. And I think the easiest swap on that is maple syrup, right? And to connect with our local sugars, but also just to generally start reducing a lot of sugar content in general.
Yeah.
And I think that maple syrup, because it's more expensive than white sugar, forces you to be really conscientious about how much of this do I need? How much should I be consuming of this thing? And then the only other sugars that most Native people ate on the continent came from our fruits, which are, of course, all of our wild berries. In Montana, where I live, we have about 14 different types of edible berries. Of course, huckleberries get all the attention, but we also have Saskatoon berries or June berries or service berries, whatever you want to call them. We have choke cherries and wild strawberries and thimbleberries and raspberries and buffalo berries and gooseberries and currants and all of these different things, right? And so that's where a lot of sugar would come from in our diets, because we don't even live in maple country here. But those could be dehydrated. They taste really sweet when they get dried out, and then you can rehydrate them. We make things like berry soup and all of that. But I think that being really conscientious about simple swaps like that helps us just start to reduce the amount of sugar in our diets, increase the amount of protein, and connect a lot more with our immediate landscapes. I mean, I think that those are three relatively easy swaps. Go find your deer hunting cousin and get them to share a little roast with you. So the saddest thing I hear is when I hear hunters that are like, "Oh yeah, I'm going hunting, but my family doesn't like eating the wild game." I'm like,
you hear that a lot.
We'll find
Hear it
family.
a lot.
No,
Yeah.
just kidding.
Get them out.
Get them out, right? And so we just came off of there was a 100-day Blackfeet diet study here. So I had a whole bunch of friends that that had signed up for this 100 days on Blackfeet foods, right? And they got provided a lot of food. There was a lot of buffalo meat that was part of that. I forgot to mention buffalo. You could buy buffalo burger at almost every store. To the point where, even though it is a wild animal, because it's been so commonly incorporated into a lot of our regular grocery store products. So that's even more accessible to most folks. But a lot of people got provided with these ingredients like buffalo tongue and a whole bunch of buffalo burger and roasts and things like that. And then they got, my friend showed me, she's like, what is this? It was just a whole bunch of like frozen pureed squash that she got. And she's like, what do I do with this stuff? They also got to eat eggs as part of that, because sometimes duck eggs were eaten. And so they did get some eggs, and then they got sunflower seeds, and there was some maple syrup that was part of this. It's kind of more of a broadly indigenous diet. But I had friends that signed up for this Blackfeet diet study and then said, I don't really like wild game. And I was like, why'd you sign up for this Blackfeet diet study? So I do a lot of virtual cooking classes. And so that means that I end up with a lot more food than I can always eat by myself. Because if I'm doing a virtual cooking class, it's just me and my husband to eat the food. And so I brought some leftovers by some folks. I was like, this is buffalo breakfast sausage. This is buffalo lasagna. Like, these are some different things. This is it was a cookie recipe that's just made of ground up sunflower seeds and maple syrup, and it sticks together like a dough, right? And you can bake it, or you can pan fry it, or you can eat it raw as the cookie dough because it's food safe, right? And she was asking me towards the end of this, she started getting more creative, and she was like, I want to make a pie out of sweet potatoes and maple syrup. She's like, what can I use for a pie crust? So I had some of this leftover cookie dough, and I was like, just use this as a pie crust, press it into the bottom of a pie tin, pre-bake it, and there you go.
That's
so
really cool. That's a good
by the
idea.
end of it, she's like, I lost 20 pounds and I really like buffalo meat now.
Like,
there you go.
Big changes.
Yes.
She's like, once I cooked it just like beef, it just tasted the same. And I was like, that's fair. Like, buffalo and beef are very similar. Don't get hung up on the different names. You could do pretty much the exact same recipes with both of them. So, but it's surprising how many people don't just make that swap.
Yeah, it's wild too.
now.
And I mean, even growing up the same, like in southeastern Oklahoma, in the Choctaw Nation, it's just like a lot of people consume. So we had commodities there growing up as well, mostly canned or preserved things. Like we would occasionally get like ground bison or things like that, but not as commonplace. Mainly that like canned pork with like the fat on the top.
Yeah. Or potted beef.
Potted beef. My grandfather, I think as a result, had this like huge love for like potted meats and like Vienna sausages and things like that. And I'm like, I just want to, if I could go back in time, I would just be like, no. But I remember us as kids, we would take the grape juice and like try to ferment it and turn it into wine. Which, as teenagers with a lot of free time on your hands in the middle of nowhere, you end up doing, adventurous things. But
you're like, we'll start moonshining. No.
Yeah, thinking through like the game aspect of it, I think like foraging was commonplace, but maybe not as much to my family because we grew a lot of food. Fishing was definitely very, very common. Like on a weekly basis, you would fish and everything we caught was eaten. And then hunting was, ritualistic, but it was also too the processing of it. Still to this day, I know many, many folks of like, they won't venture outside select cuts of meat to do things with, or like everything ends up in snack sticks and summer sausage, which those are great. Those are also, we include those in our new sausage book. So I'm not gonna frown on them too hard because they're tasty. But like growing and learning of like, well, I don't need this meat from the store because I can use venison for it in the exact same recipe. It's just like, you tell people that and you're like, wait, what? And they're like, hold on. You've been telling me for all this time that I could just make my favorite recipe, but just use venison. I'm like, yeah. They're like,
you're like, I can make spaghetti and meatballs, but with venison? Like, yeah, bro. Like, yeah, just switch it. And also for most folks, especially if you're grinding your own meat or whatever, like you're saving a ton of money. And I mean, you can go out and buy really expensive hunting gear, or you can be like everybody's uncle and just wear your flannels and you know, your trusty grandfather's rifle, and you know, like you can get yourself meat for pretty cheap. You can make it as expensive as a process as you want, but you can also save yourself a lot of money, and again, you're eating right from the land, so it's a good way of connecting with that. I will also say that, you know, we're saying this, and a lot of this probably resonates with rural people. And for people in cities, they're like, I don't know how to, like, I can't go hunt the deer that are eating my rose bushes. I lived in a city for a while and it was infested with deer and we couldn't do anything about it. And I will say that there's also such a thing as urban foraging.
Yeah,
definitely.
And so that's always fun. I'd say if you're interested in wild plants and learning more about that, find a local foraging group like on Facebook or something like that. And there's two reasons for that. One is you'll learn some plant identification, right? You'll learn what plant looks like that, you know, to see different people's crappy pictures of these different plants, right? But also you'll see what other people are seeing in your area at the same time as you, right? So when someone in May is posting pictures of a flower, oh, can I eat this flower, right? And other people, oh, yeah, you can make lemonade or whatever out of that. Cool. You know that flower is in season at that time in May and it's time to go harvest it. Or you know that maybe that flower is going to turn into berries that will be ready in August and you're going to start seeing people start posting those berries. Oh, it's berry picking time, right? So you get an idea of the seasonality of things at the same time. I would say the number one thing that I would recommend to people that are like, I just want to try one food, I don't have any money, I can't leave the city, this is what I got. Go find a conifer tree, like a pine tree, a Douglas fir, a spruce, a cedar, a juniper, something, and cut off some of the end needles. I will always say give something back. For a lot of Native people, that's putting down tobacco. If that's not part of your practice, take your water bottle and give the tree a drink of water, whatever it might be. Say thank you. Kind of show that reciprocity that you are taking something, you are also giving something back. But take some of those needles and go and simmer those in some hot water on the stove and go make yourself some tea, right? Spruce tea is delicious. Ponderosa pine needle tea is delicious. Cedar tea is amazing. All of these conifers, except for yew, Y-E-W, can be made into tea. And you can get to play around with different types of trees and, you know, the different flavors of pine versus spruce versus fir, you know, all these different things. And they're super high in vitamin C. And obviously we're recording this in February when it seems like everyone around us is sick with colds and flus and everything else. Like, drink some of nature's emergency. Look, the world is offering you vitamin C. Nobody should get scurvy on our watch. And it's one thing that, like, people don't care if you take a little bit of the tree on the public sidewalk. Like, it's right there. I will say dogs walk around, harvest above waist level. But besides that, like, it's just a really easy thing that anyone can learn more about the abundance of the gifts that the world is giving them. And if they can tap into that, it can help them feel more grounded. And also very, very conceptually, like, you are actually getting vitamin C and a delicious tea. And if you want, you can sweeten it with maple syrup or honey and, you know, kind of connect with this warm, cozy tea. I drink that iced in the middle of summer. Right. But it's something that I think any of your listeners can actually connect with.
No, definitely. That's great tips too.
I live part-time in the city, part-time in the country, and I do a lot of urban foraging. And I probably bring home well over 100 pounds of food every year, just from the trails, the parks, and whatever around me. Like, just not going that hard at it. There's just so much food out there, even in the urban setting. So you're right. City people don't need to give up on this whole thing altogether. There's so much out there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, there's so many green spaces and places. And once you start seeing it, you're like, I can eat that. I can eat that. And then you can really, you just learn more about it, and suddenly things are everywhere. And I also tell people, like, get a plant identification app. Honestly, I use Google Lens, which is
Oh yeah, I
not
do too.
necessarily made for plant identification, but it works really well for it. And you go and take a picture of a plant. If I have to fly somewhere because I'm doing a speaking gig, like, I'm looking at the plants because I want to know more about the place that I'm in, and that helps me feel grounded and not so out of place. And so that's one of the first things I do in a new place is just learn about the plants. And sometimes I learn that plant's poisonous, and I'm like, cool. And then I get to learn about a whole bunch of stories about that plant poisoning random people through history or whatever it might be. Thank you, plant identification apps that pull up Wikipedia pages.
Yeah, I love it.
That's awesome. I've got one, before we leave, I have one listener question, or I guess not listener, new follower on Instagram. And the question is, what is a food desert and how does that impact Indigenous food systems?
Yeah, so a food desert it's a terminology. It has an actual definition by the government, and it is used to classify a community or people's distance away from a grocery store, right? So it tells often how accessible fresh food is to a community. If you live out in the middle of nowhere and you might have to drive 40 miles like I do to get to a grocery store, it's considered a food desert. I also saw this comment on your Instagram, and so it was my friend Spoon. And so I know also that she probably put this in there just to torment me, because it's interesting because the word desert, right, of course, brings up these images of like, oh, this barren, ice, desolate place where nothing will grow and there are no living things. And for folks in the desert, for folks that have walked around the desert, you know that the desert is exactly opposite of that. Like, it is full of abundant plant and animal life. And you ever take out a plant identification app in the desert and you start looking at like all sorts of crazy cool plants and everything from succulents to trees that will cut off water supply to their limbs so that one limb will die because it's a drought, but the rest of the tree will stay alive. Like, there's a whole bunch of crazy cool desert plants and animals. And so I think the word desert is problematic. And also, I think that the definition doesn't really explain how far away we are from food. I can be 40 miles from a grocery store, and yet there are moose in my front yard. There's abundant berry bushes, and there are farmers and ranchers and everybody all around me, right? But I am deep in a food desert, even though I could find plenty of food, and my ancestors have been feeding themselves off this land for thousands upon thousands of years without a grocery store, right? So grocery stores, yes, that is an important part of our food system today, but it's not the extent of where we can find food. And I think that the term food desert does not assign agency to why people are so far away from getting food, right? So I have also heard terms now like supermarket redlining. What are the systemic boundaries that have been put up that make it so hard to open up a new grocery store? Because they are challenging. I mean, if you're in DC, right, you know that there are certain communities that just don't have grocery stores.
Yeah.
And there are thousands and thousands of people living there. And that is not a community that has a lot of cars, right? To get to a grocery store, that becomes a very complicated system of bus routes and, maybe an Uber ride or something, right? There were some really intentional policies that drew out DC supermarkets like that. I've also seen the term food apartheid. People use some really intense terms to describe the ways in which our food systems have been distorted and our access has been restricted. So I just like to think about it as a little bit bigger picture with some more facets. So that's why my friend Spoon is probably tormenting me with her comment, because she knew I couldn't answer it in a short answer.
I think that your answer brings a lot to my mind and drives a lot of thoughts. I've never thought about it from that perspective of like the insinuation of there being a desert. I've found fault in the fact that we base, the availability of food solely on grocery stores or a food place, and the fact that like now as we think about it, and this comes out from a conversation with Sean Sherman, it's like one of the most favorite things he's said, at least while I've been in his presence. But as far as like this whole notion of that we have to buy food, like we have to get away from that. And I think even a term that's meant to sort of like look at things holistically still puts that in the box of like a food desert means that you have to rely on the grocery store for your food. So therefore you still have to buy your food, and your distance from the ability to buy that food. We aren't even addressing the fact whether or not you can buy food or if you need to buy food. It's that you have to go there and you have to buy food, and your need is created by the distance between that. And I think the availability, and it's like, it drives a whole another thoughts. We could probably go on about this for a long time because it's,
yeah, it's definitely a system which very much positions us in terms of the overall distortion of how we get our food.
Yeah.
And we can just rebel against it.
Yeah, I'm down. I'm down.
I'd say we have the conversation again sometime and dig into that.
Yeah.
Have you back on the podcast if you be into that, and dig into food deserts, because it's a pretty interesting topic to break open more.
Yeah, it's there's a lot. There's a lot of scholars that do a lot more work on food deserts and food desert like think tanks and philosophies and all of that. And I'm just like, I don't know, maybe this isn't the term that we should use all the time. I've also heard the term food swamp.
That's interesting. I mean, I like swamps.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, as an ecologist, I'm like, why we have to have like bad ecosystems?
Swamps are great. The Everglades,
but
the whole Gulf Coast, like that's where my people are from.
The
We like the
Disney
swamp.
Yeah. And food swamp is generally used to define places where, I guess, you have access to food, right? But say it's like, oh, this is a community and they buy all of their food at the local gas station deli. Like, that's the food that people have access to, because they don't really have like fresh fruits and vegetables, but they do have the gas station deli.
Yeah,
so that's more of a food swamp.
Yeah, I could see that. That I think is where, I don't know, it's a weird mix being in DC, because like across the street from me is like a liquor store, grocery store, but the only fresh things they sell in there are potatoes, onions, and limes.
Okay.
And then from here, it's like a 30-minute walk down to the grocery store. Which if if it's 24 degrees outside or 20 degrees outside, like it is today, and you need food, like where are you going to go?
And you're like, I don't have a car, or I don't want to take my car because parking and everything. There's a whole bunch of layers. Yeah. A 24-minute walk in a city is it's not fun.
No.
It's this cold.
No.
I lived in New York City for long enough, and I'm like, to get affordable groceries, it was like, I have to take the subway down 10 stops, and then I can only have what I can carry in 2 grocery bags, right? I can't just stock up. I couldn't go to Costco because I didn't want to take the bus because that was across the island, and there wasn't a stop on the Costco route. And I was like, I'm just a Costco kid from Montana. I don't know how to cope with this. So I had to learn how to be a Trader Joe's kid that took 2 bags of groceries and a Subway to get back to my dorm to put it in the babiest freezer on earth in my dorm room. So yeah, systems on systems. I'm like, I might live 40 minutes from a grocery store now, but I have so much easier access to food in many ways than I did even when I lived in the city.
So if people want to get in touch with you, if they have questions, comments, want to chat with you more about it, what's a good way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, you can find me across the web at Indigikitchen. So that's indigikitchen.com, INDIGI kitchen. But also Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. I have recipes available on my website. I'm not one of the food bloggers that monetizes things because I don't like telling my life story, despite what this podcast makes it seem like. So there are no Google ads that pop up and annoy you. It's just recipes and videos.
Oh, that's awesome. Also, your new book, the kids' book, where can we get that?
Yeah, you can find that on my website as well. There's a link to it right on the homepage, and that's Mountains to Oceans, Kids Recipes from Native Land.
Sweet. I'm excited. We're going to get one. Adam, any last thoughts, comments?
Thanks for coming on and broaching some of these subjects, which we've been talking about getting more into lately. And it's like expanding my vision of what food is and what it's capable of lately through all these discussions. So thanks for adding to that and giving us your take on it.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks. I'll echo what Adam said. Thanks again for coming on. Valuable conversations, I think, especially talking about Indigenous foodways and pathways to make those conversations more commonplace amongst just the general population of people, even Indigenous populations, as well as just everyone. The fact that we can sit here and have this conversation and folks are going to enjoy it and tune into it. And I'm guessing take action towards it is inspiring unto itself. So I really appreciate the work you're doing and what you're doing for the communities and just everyone writ large. I think it's really awesome. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you guys. And podcasts are the 21st century moccasin telegraph. They're the way that we get to tell each other things and spread the word. So I appreciate the work that you guys are doing in this space.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks everybody for listening out there. We'll include all the show notes and links online. Or I guess we'll include all the links in the show notes online. And whatever podcast platform you're listening to, please punch that 5-star button, leave us a review, tell us we're doing right, or tell us we're doing wrong. Thanks everybody. Have a good night.